Beautiful fall day. The sun is shining, not a cloud in the sky. The Florida humidity has finally broken, and there's a little chill in the air. The day has finally arrived. One of your favorite couples all year is getting married. And actually, they might be one of your favorite couples of all time. So we're on site, the couple's with the photographer and videographer doing some last-minute photos. The florist is putting the finishing touches on the arch for the ceremony. The DJ's getting set up for the ceremony. Everything is set and ready to go. We're about an hour before guests arrive. And then a fire breaks out in the kitchen next to the ballroom, setting off the sprinkler system in the ballroom. Your floral centerpieces are ruined. Your linens, your chairs, drenched. The DJ equipment, ruined. The equipment that the photographers and videographers stored in the room for later on, toast. Photo booth, out of the question. So you're the planner. You've been working with this couple for a year, year and a half, maybe even 2 years. You've done all this pre-work. You've been on site all day. You're getting everything ready. You're the photographer and the videographer. You've been with them since 10 o'clock in the morning documenting the day. You're the florist. Everything is set up and ready to go. You're the caterer. Food's already being prepped. Like I said, we are an hour before guests arrive, and it is clear that this wedding is not going to happen. What do you do? Let's get into it. Now, I wouldn't be a very good attorney if my presentation didn't come without its own disclaimer, so let me get this out of the way. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. All legal information I talk about during this talk is meant for a variety of businesses and mass consumption. I am only your attorney if and when you hire me and we sign an engagement letter for me to specifically work on your legal issues. Please feel free to seek out another attorney in your state or jurisdiction if you need specific legal advice, or contact me for more information. Now that that's out of the way, here are the 3 things that we're going to be talking about today. Number 1, what's the worst that could happen? Number 2, we're going to talk about your client service agreements. And then number 3, I'm going to answer that elusive question of when do I need to get an attorney involved in my business. Round of applause if you ever watched the TV show This Is Us. Excellent. Love it. So you may remember that Beth and Randall, so for those of you who haven't seen the show, Beth and Randall are a married couple. They have 3 daughters. And Beth and Randall used to play this game with each other called What's the Worst That Could Happen? So whenever they were faced with the situation, maybe their daughter wanted to have a talk or they were facing a big life decision, they would play this game with each other where they would brainstorm all of the outrageous, outlandish, bizarre things that could possibly come from whatever they were about to face. And now they probably did this to help relieve some stress, reduce some anxiety, but also to try to prepare for what was about to happen. As an attorney, it is literally my job to think of all the terrible things that can happen and then try to help you prepare for that in advance before those things happen. So, what's the worst that could happen? The wedding venue catches on fire. That story that I opened with is a true story. It happened in New Jersey just a few years ago. So imagine you're one of the vendors at that event. What do you do? Presumably your contract allowed you to keep all of their money, but you just saw this couple's wedding day literally go up in smoke. How are you going to handle that situation? What's the worst that could happen? You're a wedding planner. And after the wedding, the couple comes to you, sends a demand letter, demanding that you pay the $100,000 that they overspent on their wedding budget. Also a true story. So now, for our clients, we start putting into their contracts for our planners what their responsibility is about their budget, for their clients' budgets, and making it clear that you as the planner have no responsibility for them spending too much money. What's the worst that could happen? Couple breaks up the week of the wedding. Bride says, well, I still want to have a party. Groom says, Absolutely not. Who do you listen to? In this situation, this brings up the idea of potentially having a decision maker clause in your contract as to who is the ultimate decision maker, who is that last voice that you listen to. But also, I always say that if you were to move forward with a bride for that party, you're absolutely getting an agreement from her in case the groom decides to sue you for moving forward with the party. And for a lot of wedding and event professionals, the worst thing that could happen is actually getting sued or threatened with litigation. So what to do when you get that dreaded email from the client letting you know that they're unhappy with something, that they want to terminate, that they want money back? First thing, I want you to take a deep breath. I was a wedding planner for 10 years, so I know what those emails feel like. Your shoulders clench up, you probably feel a little bit nauseous, you get some butterflies in your stomach, you might feel a little tightness in your chest. So take a deep breath. We're gonna get through this. And the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to call your attorney. And the reason I say that is because what you say in that first substantive response back to your clients is going to be critical. Now, I want you to respond, let them know, say, hey, I received your email, let me take some time to review and I will get back to you. We don't want them to think that you're ignoring them. But then I want you to talk to an attorney because your attorney is going to help you figure out what to say in response. I don't want you apologizing in that first email back. I don't want you to offer them anything in that first email back. And I certainly don't want you to agree to anything that they have asked you for in that first email back. Talk to your attorney. They're going to get the facts. They're going to take a look at your contract. They're going to help you from just a general business perspective to have a discussion of, okay, what is the best way to handle this? And then you can respond accordingly. Your attorney doesn't necessarily need to be the one to send that first response. That might be aggressive, might escalate things a little bit, but they absolutely should be part of that process. And there's two reasons why I say that. Number one, I know, like I said, we get those emails, we feel terrible, and our initial reaction is to do whatever it takes to make it go away. But then 24, 48 hours passes, and you've had some time to think about it, you've cooled down, the emotions have settled, and you're like, wait a second, this had nothing to do with me, this wasn't my fault, and wow, I can't believe that I offered them this. I'm so mad at myself for agreeing to do X, Y, and Z in that email back. So we want to protect you from that regret. The second thing, the reason why I want you to have an attorney help you with that substantive response, I don't want you to accidentally create a binding agreement via email. So we had a client, photographer, couple hated their wedding photos. Now, for the record, one of the first things I did was had the photographer send me the gallery because I was like, I need to know what I'm defending here. And of course, the photos were beautiful, so that sets the stage for what this was like. But the couple said they hated the photos, wanted money back. The photographer, before engaging us, had a little bit of back and forth with them, offered to send them some additional unedited images that they could pick from to have him edit, all of this stuff. And so he'd gotten to the point with the email where they were just not seeing eye to eye, so he brought in legal help. But at one point, he had said, yes, I will provide these for you, but you have to sign a termination agreement. And what happened was the couple said, we're not signing a termination agreement, and now not only are you in breach of your original contract because you didn't provide the quality of photos that we had contracted for, but now you're in breach of an email where you agreed to provide us these additional images. Now, in this situation, fortunately, the elements of a contract were not present and he was not legally bound by that offer. But that is how easy it is to get yourself into trouble with an email when it's offering things or accepting things. So I want you to make sure you have an attorney involved when you get these client dispute emails. So if the client wants to terminate early, I want you to take a look at your contract and see what your contract says are grounds for early termination. And then ask yourself, what is it that the client is alleging happened? And then the analysis is, well, is that a reason for them to be able to terminate under my contract? And then if they're asking for money, we want to say, okay, what is it that they're alleging happened or didn't happen? Then we're going to go right back to our contract. We're going to take a look and see what our contract says about that. And then we're going to figure out whether you have actual proof of whether the service was performed. In dealing with these client disputes, one of the conversations that we always have with our clients is the business decision versus the legal decision. This is a conversation that has to be had. So the business decision is the best decision for your business. The legal decision, that is what your contract technically allows you to do in the situation. And they are not always going to be the same thing. So it's important to think about these things. So going back to the story that I opened with, again, you're one of the vendors, the client's wedding venue caught on fire, the wedding's not happening. What do you do in that situation? Like I said, I would imagine your contract allows you to just walk away, keep all the money, but what's the best business decision? What's the human decision? You just watch their wedding day, just all of their dreams just completely evaporate. So do you agree to refund the money? Do you agree to reschedule? Do you agree to any kind of compromise with them to try to help them with the situation? Or do you stick with your contract and just take the money and walk away? These are all questions that have to be asked. I myself had a very interesting situation where I had to, when I was a planner, where I had to weigh the business decision and the legal decision. So it was fall of 2019. A couple booked me for full planning for a wedding in New York City the following year. We did a little bit of work, got to 2020 in New York City, and you can all imagine what happened at that point. So everything shut down immediately. They were like, we are going to reschedule our wedding to the next year. Well, my contract at the time allowed me, in the event of a rescheduling, to consider it a termination, to keep all of their money, and to frankly collect the balance of my fee. But in that moment, it's COVID, we're in those unprecedented times, and I said, the best business decision here is to allow them to reschedule. So we hadn't done a ton of work up to that point. I didn't feel like I needed to charge them a rescheduling fee, so I agreed to reschedule them to June of 2021. We put a pause on planning for the rest of 2020 and decided to reconvene at the beginning of the next year. So now we get to 2020, have a chat with them early that year. Like I said, their wedding was going to be in June of that year, and they said, we're still not comfortable, we're not confident that this is going to happen. We don't want to sign more contracts, potentially lose money, all of that stuff. So we want to move our wedding to 2022. And I said, that's fine. This time I'm going to have to charge you a rescheduling fee. They gave me a hard time about the rescheduling fee, even though it was less than what I was charging anybody else. I did get the money from them, but I made this mental note of sort of how difficult they were in that situation. And again, the rescheduling fee, I'm working with you for like 2 more years. I'm having to continue to find you new vendors, to check with all of your existing vendors, to do this date shuffling game, all of that stuff. I know all of you know, especially in the context of like hurricanes and weather events like that, you know what that's like. So we decide we're postponing to 2022. We put a pause again on everything for 2021, agree that we're going to reconvene at the start of 2022. So we get to January 2022. Their wedding is scheduled for June of 2022, and I'm desperately trying to get them on the phone because they basically have no vendors at this point. And I'm like, if we're gonna have this wedding in 5 months, we need to get moving. They pushed me off. They were busy with work. They were traveling. They were on vacation. I finally get a hold of them at the end of February that year, and they inform me that they want to postpone their wedding to 2023. I politely inform them that I cannot go on that journey with them and that I'm going to just give them all of their money back and we're going to have a clean break. Now, again, my contract allowed me to keep all of my money, collect the balance of their fee. That was the legal decision. But the best business decision, I knew based on their reaction to me charging that rescheduling fee, based on just kind of our general interactions, I knew that I was not going to get the clean break that I wanted if I kept a dime of their money. So I wrote a 5-figure check. I put it in the mail, and yes, it hurt very much writing it, but honestly, I put it in the mail, I sent it out with like love and well wishes, and I never heard from them again. It was the clean break that I wanted. That was the best business decision. In that moment, I took into account what was going to be the best for me, for my mental health, personally, for my business. I didn't want to have to worry about negative reviews or worry about them coming back asking for things. It was a pure clean break. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Oop, okay. And so when we're thinking about how we're weighing these decisions, we have to take our personal selves into account. Like, this is not just all business. Our emotional, mental well-being is equally as important. And I also wanted to make a little side note here and just say that please, 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 please don't let pride, ego, principle come into play when you're making these decisions. I know folks have these hard and fast rules about they're never giving refunds, they're never doing X, Y, and Z, and I think there's always nuance to a situation, and every situation needs a little consideration, so I don't love these hard and fast rules. But also then when it comes to ego, that can mess you up as well. We've seen situations where a vendor was a little bit at fault, but sort of out of ego, didn't want to resolve things with the client. And so we went from a place where the client was initially asking for $1 amount to be refunded, and then by the end that amount had tripled because the vendor had just dragged their feet, didn't want to take responsibility for their actions. So please try to put all of that aside when you're taking a look at these situations. And then we also have to consider optics. With the way the internet works, the way social media works these days, we cannot underestimate our clients' ability to weaponize the media against us. What if this headline was about your business? That's all people are going to see. Most people, all they're going to see is that headline. There might be some people that read 1 or 2 lines in because they want to figure out what is this venue and I want to hate them for the rest of my life. But I promise you nobody's reading the whole story. And more than that, nobody, other than maybe me, is going to read that and go, wait a second, I wonder what their venue contract said. Because me, knowing this, I'm sure the contract allowed them to keep the money. But that's not what this headline says, and that's not what anybody else is going to know. They're going to see that headline, they're going to attach it to their company, your company, and they're frankly going to hate you forever. So I hate that we have to take this into account, but it is something that we have to be aware of. This is how information spreads, and you're not going to get a chance to defend yourself if that headline is about you. So now that I've scared everybody, I figure it's time to talk about how we handle things from the beginning. And that's why we're turning to client service agreements. There are 3 reasons why your client service agreements are so important. Number 1, they are a foundation of your business. They're a building block, just like having a legal entity for your business, having insurance, having separate business and personal banking accounts. All of those things, your client service is a foundational element of your business. Number 2, it is the foundation of the relationship with your clients. It's going to set forth everything that governs this relationship. All the emails that were exchanged, any conversations that were had prior to contract signing, frankly, none of that matters. This contract and anything that comes after is what is setting forth your relationship. That contract is going to have the details of the event. It's going to talk about payment. It's going to talk about the obligations of both sides. And most importantly, it's going to talk about what happens when something goes wrong. We want your contract to be detailed and thorough enough that when something goes awry, we're not left guessing as to what we're supposed to do. We know, we have that procedure. We just take a look at our contract and we know what to do. And the third reason our client service agreements are so important is, as I've alluded to, they are how we try to tackle a lot of these issues before they actually happen. So when you get home from SWEL and you have some time, I want you to do an audit of your client service agreement. And here are some of the questions that you are going to ask in doing that. Number 1, when was the last time I had an attorney review my client service agreement? If you have never worked with an attorney on your client service agreement, now would be the time to do so. I know a lot of folks, when you're just starting out in business, you kind of cobbled together your contract, you Frankenstein it together, as I like to say. So maybe you got a contract from a colleague, started with that, copy and pasted some stuff from Google, got some provisions from somebody in a Facebook group, which please, if you take anything from my presentation today, please stop taking legal advice from non-lawyers in Facebook groups. That is number one. But I talk about, I understand, like I said, I understand why you sort of had to kind of piecemeal your contracts together, and I used to talk about how I didn't love it, but I never talked about why. So I want to actually explain why it's not necessarily the best practice when you are an established business. So number one, if you are getting provisions from somebody else, there's a high probability that you're going to have conflicting provisions in your contract. I was just reading a contract the other day, and the travel provision said the client is going to reimburse the vendor for all of the travel, and then there was a sentence that said all travel fees are included in the price. And so I'm like, okay, which one are we going with here? So that's a high probability. There's a probability of missing or like conflicting defined terms. You're referred to photographer in one place and vendor in another place and company in another place, or maybe your name. We don't love that. Also, it's possible you're getting provisions that aren't actually in compliance with your state law. So that's a risk there. And also, if you've never worked with an attorney to really go through your contract, you probably don't understand everything that's in there. And understanding your contract is incredibly important to me. I also want to add that if you haven't had your contract reviewed since 2020, now would also be a great time to do that. Even I took my planning agreement to a lawyer because I wanted to make sure that those force majeure rescheduling and cancellation provisions were actually working the way that I wanted them to. The next question you're going to ask yourself, when was the last time I updated my agreement? Now, I recommend revisiting your contract once a year, maybe twice, if you feel so inclined. But if something major happens, then I want you to sort of tackle that in that moment. And when you're doing these audits, you're going to ask yourself, did any situations happen this year that I'd like to address in my client service agreement? Maybe you're a vendor, photographer, videographer, DJ, caterer, and you often find yourself working with couples who don't have planners, and you also often find yourself being asked to produce the timeline for the entire day. If that's not something you want any part of, you can put that in your contract. It can be something as simple as we will provide our photography timeline or the food service timeline, but we will not be responsible for the timeline or run of show of the entire day. I've also seen some people take that a step further and actually require that their couples hire a planner or at least a coordinator event manager. So that's something that you could also consider adding into your contract. I had a situation where one of those, and I know we've all had them, where the wedding happens, you're driving home, and in your mind you're like, yep, tomorrow morning I am waking up and I'm putting this in my contract first thing. So I had a wedding. Early on in my career, the couple didn't hire a DJ or a band for the wedding. So guess who ended up having to cue the ceremony music and the first dance music and the parent dance music? This lady right here. And guess who was infinitely stressed and uncomfortable by having to cue the ceremony music and the first dance music and the parent dance music? This lady right here. It was an absolutely ridiculous situation where we had I think it was an iPhone plugged into a PA system, and the ceremony is on this rooftop, and I hit play on the iPhone, the wedding party goes down. I'm like manually turning down the volume to like fade out the music. When they get up, I hit stop on the iPhone, I switch the song, I turn the volume back up, I hit play again, and the bride and her dad walk down, and then I do the no. I was like, I am never doing this again. This is not my job. This is for professionals who actually know how to do this. So you better believe I went home, and the next day I put a provision in my contract, and it was incredibly simple. All it said was if the client does not hire a DJ or a band for their event, they will designate a responsible and sober individual to handle things like cueing music and making announcements, because the planner will not be responsible for that. It was one sentence. And so it can be that easy, and I'm going to talk a little bit later on that you don't have to always go back to your attorney to add things. So it can really be that simple. And then the last question as part of this audit, I want you to think outside of things that happened on the wedding day. What were some of your pain points this year? Did you find yourself having to chase clients for payments a lot? I don't know why this is, and I don't mean any, no offense to any DJs in the room, but I find with a lot of DJs, especially ones that I worked with, they collected their final balance on the day of the wedding. And I, even as a planner, with me reminding the couple, make sure you have the payments, I can't tell you how many times my clients forgot to pay the DJ on the wedding day. So if you're a DJ and that's happening to you, or even if you're just any other vendor type and you're having to chase your clients for payment, then that says to me that your payment provisions need a little bit of beefing up. And then maybe you are getting substantive text messages from clients when that is not your preferred method of communication, or you're getting emails outside of office hours or on weekends expecting prompt responses. All of that can be handled in your contract. We would put a communication provision in there that says email is your preferred method of communication, and here are our office hours. It is possible to use your contract to set these boundaries and also try to prevent these disputes and things from happening in the future. Now, at the end, I'm going to give you a QR code that links to a video that's going to give you some more details on actual provisions for your client service agreement. But there is one provision that I'm incredibly passionate about that I felt needed to be talked about on the stage. Now, I'm from New York City, so this isn't exactly how I would have phrased this question. And even Shannon Tarrant has said that she doesn't really want to see a lawyer or an accountant or a business professional on stage swearing. So we're going to keep this PG, and the question is, what the heck does indemnity mean? And there's two reasons why we're talking about indemnity. Number one, it's probably the least understood provision by vendors. By show of hands or round of applause, if there's anybody in the room who thinks that they could stand up and explain what indemnity means, I would love to hear from you. Okay, we're in a room of 200 people, and I get it, it's intimidating. Maybe you have an idea, but you don't want to, you might feel embarrassed. But this is a room of 200 people, and basically not really anybody knows exactly what indemnity means. So it is very misunderstood by vendors. I was on a podcast recently. It was a B2C podcast, so it's a podcast for people who are getting married, and the host is a wedding planner. And we were talking about contract provisions, breaking things down into plain English. And so she wanted me to talk about indemnity. And so I'm sitting there and I'm explaining what indemnity means, and I'm just watching her eyes get bigger and bigger, and her head's about to explode. And we get finished with the definition, and she's like, oh my God, that's what that means? And she's been a planner for probably a decade, has an indemnity provision in her contract, which I imagine many of you do as well, and she actually had no idea what indemnity means. So that is why I'm talking about it here on the stage today. And also, it's going to be that provision that all of your clients are going to either ask you about, or they're going to ask you to take it out of your contract. And so I want to spend a little time with some education. So what the heck does indemnity mean? Number one, an indemnification is a contractual obligation. The reason I point that out is because indemnity doesn't just exist at law. It doesn't exist in the ether. It has to be something in your contract in order for you to have it. So it's a contractual obligation of one party, who we call the indemnitor, to compensate the other party, who we call the indemnitee, for the losses incurred by the indemnity as a result of the acts of the indemnitor or some third party. Now, you're often going to see it accompanied by the words defend and hold harmless, so the provision's probably going to say, client agrees to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless vendor from and against X, Y, and Z. I always like to point out that your indemnification is not blanket protection for you for anything that you do. For gross negligence and willful misconduct, in most states, that's not something that you can contractually waive your obligations for. So if you go and intentionally burn the wedding venue down, your contract is not going to save you in that context. I always like to burn things down when I give hypotheticals. And then it actually happened. Imagine the glee when it actually happened, and I got to use a real life example. So here's how indemnity works. Here's a hypothetical. But let's say you are a planner. Your contract says, client agrees to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless planner from and against all claims, losses, damages arising out of the event. And so we have the wedding day. At the end of the night on the wedding day, the DJ's equipment has been damaged and is broken and is not functioning. Nobody knows what happened. Maybe somebody spilled something, maybe somebody bumped into it, maybe there was some weird power surge at the venue. We don't really know. All we know is that at the end of the night, the DJ's equipment isn't working, and the DJ, like many people these days, decides to sue everybody they can get their hands on. They throw it at the wall just to see what sticks. So the DJ is suing the couple, suing the venue, suing you as the planner. Now, assuming you have this indemnity provision and that you weren't responsible for the damage to the DJ's equipment, if the DJ's taking you to court or you're retaining an attorney to just send letters back and forth to the DJ, this indemnification provision means that your clients are going to reimburse you for those legal expenses. That is why. It's when you get sued for something that is not your fault, the client is going to have to reimburse you for the costs associated with that. Here is a real life example. I have a photographer friend who contracted with a couple for a wedding day coverage plus some album for the couple, some albums for the parents, and it's also important to point out that the photographer had a contract with the couple, with the people who were getting married. Wedding day happens, photos get delivered, albums get delivered to the couple, everything's great, they're super happy with everything. Then the mother of the bride, who at some point during the planning process, the relationship was strained, she was disinvited from the wedding, mother of the bride decides to sue the photographer because she didn't get her parent album. Now again, reminder, photographer contract with the people who got married, delivered the albums to the people who got married, who they had the contract with, and somehow, and I'm fuzzy on the details of this, somehow this actually ended up in court. The mother of the bride and the photographer were in court in front of a judge. Judge obviously rules in favor of the photographer because it's like, we have a contract, the photographer fulfilled the terms of the contract. Mother of the bride, you have no standing here. But still, even though the photographer won, they had to pay the attorney's fees, they had to pay the court costs, there was a lot that went into that. And because that photographer, when the photographer told me the story, the first thing I said was, do you have an indemnification provision? And they were like, yes. And I was like, great, because that means that the couple ended up having to repay you for all of those costs. Because you're the photographer, you should not be responsible for the mother of the bride's behavior or anything that happens because of the personal relationship between family and your couple. And so I've defined what indemnity is, which hopefully you all understand, or have a better understanding. It's complicated. Like, frankly, it took me a long time to be able to break it down and explain it like this. But now that you have the definition, here is how we are defending this to our clients. And there's two main things that you can tell your clients when they say, well, this feels like a lot of risk on us, or we want to completely remove this. So number one, you are a wedding vendor who does multiple weddings. Depending on your category, we could be in the 10s, we could be in the 50s. For some of you, it's probably in the hundreds. And if every time you stepped foot on site, you were putting yourself at risk for being sued for something that had nothing to do with you and having to come out of pocket and keep paying to defend these things, you would go bankrupt. It would make no sense for you to be in business. And so that is why we have this indemnity, because it's an allocation of risk. You're doing multiple events across the year. This is a one-time thing for the client. It wouldn't make sense for you to be a small business owner if you were opening yourself up to this unlimited liability, and so that's why we have the indemnity provision. And the second reason, and this is really important, and I wish there was a little more people talking about this out there, but there is some responsibility that comes when our clients have a wedding. It is not just a big, pretty day. Don't get me wrong, it's a great day. Love the celebration, love the gathering of all of your favorite people. But it is not just all fun. It's not just all pretty things. There is some actual responsibility that comes along with that. Our clients, the couples, those are the people who control the environment. They are selecting all of the vendors. They are picking the venue and creating the environment where this thing is happening. Also, they're in charge of the guest list. They get to pick who is coming to this. And so because they have so much control over creating this environment, they also have to take some responsibility for that. And so they need to be responsible for the things that their vendors do, that their guests do, when you had nothing to do with it. And also I like to point out, clients can get insurance to cover them for a lot of these things. So frankly, I think it's a great thing to just be in general recommending that your clients have general liability and event cancellation insurance, because when they have access to funds that cover all of this stuff, that helps them understand and be more willing to undertake this allocation of liability as well. This is the number one question I get after I've done a contract update for somebody, and I end up adding like probably a good, 5 to 10 pages to their existing agreement. They always say, isn't this is a little too intense, isn't this going to scare clients away? Now, in my 10 years as a wedding planner, I had probably the scariest contract there was. Like I said, my contract didn't require me to even talk about rescheduling. If you wanted to change your date, I got to keep all your money and collect the balance of the fee. And I tell you that in the time I was wedding planning, once somebody decided to hire me and I sent them their contract, never once did anybody say, this is too scary, I'm not reading this, I no longer want to work with you. And it's something that I tell our clients too, like if you ever have somebody tell you that, please come to me. Our firm's been in business now for 1.5 years. I've not had anybody come back to me with that. So I do truly think that it is a myth that these contracts can be so long that they're gonna scare our clients away, especially if you're working in the luxury high-end space. These high net worth individuals, that's how they do business. They are used to having contracts. There's an Instagram account called, Nancy Narking, who posted screenshots. They do a lot of confidential vendor-facing questions, but they asked a question of couples what's some of your honest feedback for vendors? And they got multiple comments from clients saying that they were embarrassed by how bad their vendors' contracts were. They were like, we're spending tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars with these people, and their contracts, some of them don't make sense, some of them are very poorly drafted. And so in the luxury space, clients are looking for a luxury serious experience. So this goes to part of that. I also believe that when you have a more thorough, more detailed contract, part of it is about how you sell it to your clients. You can be honest, you can tell them and say, hey, I know this contract is gonna be a little bit longer, it might look a little more intimidating than what you're used to seeing, but I promise you, once you start reading through it, you will understand the provisions. Also, let them know that you are there for questions and feedback. Getting back to my not liking hard and fast rules, I also don't approve of the rule of never making any changes to your contract. There are some provisions I want you to stand firm on, but just having this blanket rule I don't think is a great way to go about things. And also when you are going through talking about this contract with your clients, like I said, be open to questions. I don't want you going through everything from top to bottom, but do answer questions. And also, like I said, reassure them. Once they start reading it, I do think they will understand it. It's not just, don't let the optics scare them away. Also, as I already mentioned, letting your clients know there is a responsibility that comes along with having a wedding. Yes, your contract is going to be very protective of you. It shouldn't necessarily be completely unfair, but it is going to be more protective of you because you have far more at risk and you're taking that risk far more often than the client who is doing this once. And I also like to point out, your contract is a living, breathing document. So like I said, I have told my clients, if you ever hand this contract to a couple and they say, oh, I can't sign this, this is too intense, this is too scary, I said, come back to me immediately. My goal is to make your life easier, to make your business run smoother. I am not here to cause any kind of friction. And also, going back to what I talked about the auditing piece, your contract is not just one and done. Some things might not work. You might have to add things to it. If you keep getting clients asking questions about the same provision or pushing back on the same thing, let's have a conversation, let's talk about it. Your contract should be a living, breathing document that you are going back to, that you are not afraid to update, and again, that you are hopefully working with your attorney to make sure that it actually works for you. Now, the last piece here today is answering the question of when to get an attorney involved in your business, because I know a lot of folks don't necessarily know when that time is. And one of the reasons I spend time talking about this is because I also am fully aware that law is scary, that a lot of times when you need a lawyer, it's not a super fun situation that you're in, and I acknowledge there is general distrust of lawyers and attorneys. We get a really bad rap on TV and movies and all of that good stuff. So I want to spend a little bit of time helping you kind of figure out, okay, when do I need to bring an attorney into my business? So there are some things you can handle on your own. Like I said at the beginning, my DJ provision, needing to add in language. It was one sentence that I added that said, I'm never going to cue your ceremony music or make announcements for you ever again. But also going back to the situation I said, if you're a non-planner vendor who's always being asked to do timelines, it's a simple sentence that says you're responsible for your own timeline, nobody else is. Or if you're one of those vendors and you want to start requiring your clients to hire planners, it's one sentence. A photographer requires that client work with a planner or at least a coordinator event manager. Those are things that you can add in yourself. Another example, sparklers. I know for my planners out there, some people don't love handling sparkler exits. And so it can be a simple sentence that says, planner will not coordinate sparkler exits or deal with amateur fireworks. And then here's one of my favorite stories. Talk about what's the worst that could happen. Dear friend of mine is a photographer in the South, and on her wedding day, it was a very small, intimate wedding, and on the wedding day, the bride's hair and makeup team didn't show up. So my photographer friend gets on the phone, starts calling everybody she possibly can to try to get a replacement, to no avail. So my friend, who happens to be good at doing her own hair, ended up, she's, mind you, photographer, she ended up doing the bride's hair on the wedding day, and I was like, I am horrified and I really hate that for you. So again, if that's something that happened, like if you find, and not obviously a photographer being asked to do a bride's hair is like a very far-fetched thing, not gonna happen a lot. But if you find yourself constantly being asked to do the services of another vendor, maybe if another vendor is not hired, that is something that you can put into your contract, and it can be plain language. There is not necessarily magical language that lawyers have a way of writing things. Like you can just state things as like fact and state your intent and put it in your contract. There are some things that could go either way. So thinking about comments that you might get back on your agreement. So if a client's coming to you and maybe they want to break up their payments into more installments than you usually do. So maybe you usually do 50% up front, 50% before the wedding. Client comes to you and says, hey, it would really be helpful for me if we could split this up into 4 payments. That's a business decision, a personal business decision. You don't need to get your lawyer involved in that. You get to decide. Another common one that's a business decision is a client coming to you and saying, hey, we don't want you using our wedding photos. You don't need to necessarily talk to your lawyer about that. That's a personal decision. You get to say yes, you get to say no, maybe you have some compromise language, maybe you charge a fee for that if you can't use them, but those are all things that you get to decide, and you don't have to run to your lawyer every time you get a comment like that. However, if your clients are commenting on your indemnity provision, on your limitation of liability provision, if they want to change your force majeure, rescheduling, cancellation provisions, all of those things, that's when I want you to talk to a lawyer, because those are things that might be a little bit more difficult to just draft yourself, and your lawyer is going to understand how those things function and will let you know what's okay to change and what is not. And then there are a handful of situations where I absolutely want you to hire an attorney. Like I said at the beginning, if you've never had an attorney work on your contract or not purchase an attorney drafted template, I want you to get an attorney involved. I want you to work with one on your client service agreement. When you're hiring people, so an attorney in this situation is going to play 2 roles. Number 1, they're going to help you with that employee versus independent contractor classification, which I know is getting stickier for people these days. And then number 2, they're going to be able to draft whatever contracts you need with those people. Because when you are bringing people onto your team, I want to make sure that you have contracts in place with them. The next one, when going into business with somebody. So I already said, if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's to stop taking legal advice from people on Facebook. If you take a second thing away from this presentation, I want it to be to know that when you go into business with somebody, you have to have a contract with them. So that contract, that partnership agreement, that operating agreement, it's going to talk about a lot of things. It's going to talk about the money that we're contributing to the business to begin with, who's putting what in. It's going to talk about what the responsibilities are of each party. It's going to talk about how we ultimately start sharing our profits and expenses. And then most importantly, it's going to talk about what to do when the partnership ends or when somebody wants out. Because your business relationship, it might end on a very happy note. Maybe somebody just decided they want to start a family and want to step away from the business. It might end on a really happy note. The two of you might not be on speaking terms. But this contract needs to, in detail, talk about what happens when this relationship ends. Think of it like a prenup for your business, frankly. Because the consequences are very expensive and potentially very uncomfortable. We have seen a situation where somebody entered into a business relationship with multiple folks, didn't have had a contract, but didn't have it reviewed by an attorney. That person eventually needed to withdraw from the business. They signed a withdrawal agreement, also not with an attorney. And in that agreement, they decided to stay on with the company for basically a 10% share of just completely passive income. They were a silent partner, but they got 10%. The business relationship soured so much that this person actually, and the agreement was drafted so badly for them, that this person actually just left the business completely, left that income stream because they couldn't make things work, because they didn't have an agreement that they had an attorney involved in drafting. Another situation, I've seen a photography duo who wanted to part ways, did not have a partnership agreement in place, couldn't agree on the terms of the breakup, and instead decided to keep staying in business together. That is not something that I want for any of you. So on the front end, yes, it is a financial investment to have a partnership agreement drafted for this business, but I am promising you that it is going to save you a lot of money on the back end because it's just going to make everything clear about how this relationship works. In a client dispute, I've already talked about the importance of getting an attorney involved when you get a client dispute email or letter. And then the last, before you sign anything, I mean, frankly, it's good practice to talk to an attorney before you're entering into any kind of agreement. I have had people tell me, like, friends come to me all the time that we don't officially represent, but they're like, I've got this problem going on. Yes, I should have had you review this before I signed it, but now I want out, and it becomes messy. Like, before you sign anything, ideally I want you talking to an attorney. We have a client who I like to say I've trained very well because she knows to come back to me for everything. We worked on our client service agreement together. We've done a few projects together. And then whenever she's like bringing on a social media manager or hiring somebody, she knows to come back and have me take a look at the agreement. So one day she sends me an agreement. It was very simple. She was hiring a graphic designer to create a color palette for her and a mood board for her because she was considering a rebrand. She sends me the contract, asks me to take a look. First thing I do is take a look at what's being provided and also the dollar amount. It was a very teeny tiny dollar amount, so I knew, I was like, I'm not marking this agreement up. I'm just taking a quick look to make sure that everything looks good. Lo and behold, hidden in this agreement is a free termination right on the part of the designer that allows the designer to terminate the contract without cause. If the contractor terminates, she gets to keep everything she was paid and the full project was paid up front. And then also if she terminates, she has no obligation to deliver any of the work product that she has done. So in theory, this contract allowed this person to sign the contract with my client, get paid, terminate the next day, keep the money, and not have to do any work. And so that is what you are having an attorney help with, is to find things like that that you may not know to look for. And as my business partner Kumbi says, if you don't understand it, don't sign it. That's how we get into trouble. And then I like to say, start a relationship with a business attorney before you need one. One of my favorite questions to ask is, do you want somebody to respond to your email at 4 o'clock on a Friday? If you do, you have to know this, you have to know the attorney in advance. No attorney is gonna answer your cold email, your panicked email at 4 o'clock on a Friday unless they already know you. So that's gonna be a benefit there. I want you to like your attorney. So it's worth shopping around. Ask your colleagues who they are using. Do some research. Have calls with multiple people. I want you to like your attorney, and it's so important that you actually trust them. You're gonna be in some pretty vulnerable situations with your attorney in terms of situations that happen with your business. You're gonna have to be open and honest about things that happen. You might have to be taking responsibility for some missteps that you made. So you have to like and you have to trust your attorney. It's also helpful to start this relationship because then you understand how their legal fees work. So when something does happen and you have to bring them on board, you know what to expect. You know how much to budget for these things. You know if you can afford to work with them. Doing this is gonna bring you so much peace of mind and confidence in your business because you're gonna know that there is somebody that has your back. It's somebody that's an advocate for you. It's somebody that's gonna answer the phone or answer that email when you have an issue. And so please don't start the process, the stressful process of trying to find an attorney in an already stressful situation. So this is me in the corner doing a little happy dance because you actually took my advice and you started a relationship with an attorney before you needed one.